20 years ago, a young girl at Pine Ridge Reservation vanished after a community gathering, disappearing without a trace and leaving her family plunged into panic and despair. Authorities suspected a man who lived near the scene, someone who had been seen around the area of her vehicle, but with no body, no witnesses, and far too few leads to pursue. The investigation quickly stalled. Yet for 2 full decades, one young investigator never gave up, clinging to tiny details overlooked in the old files. Then one day, while re-examining forgotten evidence, she uncovered a clue everyone else had missed, a clue powerful enough to upend the entire case and shock the community in ways no one could have imagined. Before we dive deeper into this story, let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit subscribe to follow what happens next. Pine Ridge Reservation, South Dakota, a June evening in 1995. Wind from the prairie swept across the low wooden cabins, carrying a fine red dust that coated everything like a gray veil. There was no rain, but the air hung heavy and thick, as if the night itself were pressing down on the settlement. Dim yellow light flickered from windows onto the dirt, casting trembling patches of glow, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked in short bursts, before sinking back into the vast silence, typical of this land. At the small community center on the edge of the trees, the group meeting had just ended. Ayanna Red Cloud, 19 years old, was the first to stand and leave the circle. She wrapped a thin jacket around her shoulders, gave a small nod to everyone, and stepped outside as darkness fell. A friend sitting near the door later recalled that when Ayanna walked into the yard, she seemed distracted, glancing quickly over her shoulder now and then, as if making sure no one was following her. She headed toward the dirt road leading away from the settlement, her steps light but hurried, fading into the darkness beyond the reach of the lights. A neighbor who lived at the corner said he heard the soft putter of a motorcycle around that time. A familiar sound because Ayanna usually rode home on hers, but he couldn't be sure. In Pine Ridge, vehicles came and went all night. It wasn't unusual, and no one paid much attention, especially to sounds that appeared and vanished so quickly. From that moment on, no one saw Ayanna again that night. When the clock passed the usual time she came home, her family began to worry. They thought maybe she'd stopped at a friend's house, or lingered to talk, but as darkness fully enveloped the settlement, and every cabin shut its doors, the silence grew unnatural. Her mother walked to Ayanna's room, knocked softly, then harder, calling her name, but there was no answer. They phoned Ayanna's best friend, who said she had left the meeting earlier than usual, and hadn't been seen since. Unease rose fast because Ayanna never failed to come home, not even once. No one in the house slept. They stood at the door, staring down the pitch-black dirt road, seeing only the endless prairie and a wind that blew harder through the night. Finally, when no reasonable explanation remained for her absence, the family called tribal police and reported that Ayanna Red Cloud was missing. Tribal police arrived minutes after the call, red and blue lights sweeping softly across the dark wooden walls, waking the settlement in a haze of unease. No one said it out loud, but everyone felt something was wrong. Ayanna wasn't the type to leave a gathering and simply vanish. The night duty officer began asking the basic questions. When was the last time anyone saw Ayanna? What time did she leave the community building? Was anyone with her or waiting outside? Each person offered a piece, but nothing was clear. Her friend only saw her hurry out. The neighbor heard a motorcycle, but wasn't sure it was hers. Others saw nothing but thick darkness. As the sky began to turn gray, tribal police launched the first search. They spread a simple map over the hood of a patrol truck, marking the routes Ayanna might have taken: the dirt road north, the trail looping west into the trees, and the old road south toward BIA 27. Every direction was wide, long and unpredictable, because vehicles could be heard coming and going from all sides at night. The area was sparsely populated, with few streetlights, and at night every track looked the same under the red dirt. The searchers split into 3 teams. The first followed the main road out of the settlement, checking shoulders, ditches, and soft patches that might hold tire or footprints. But the ground was dry and dusty. Old tracks from vehicles and people were everywhere, impossible to tell what belonged to the previous night. The second team swept the western area of low shrubs and clusters of prickly pear. They checked every crevice, every narrow path between rocks. Everything was absolutely still, only the rustle of dry leaves and wind whipping through branches. No jacket left behind, no forgotten purse, nothing to suggest Ayanna had passed through. The third team headed south, the route many believed she might have taken to get home fast. But the road stretched on endlessly, just red dirt, scorched grass and desolation. They stopped, shone lights along both sides, looking for anything unusual, disturbed earth, torn fabric, personal items, but there was only the absolute monotony of the prairie. During the sweep, police asked every nearby cabin if anyone had heard arguing, sudden breaking, or anything out of the ordinary that night. The answers were all the same: no, just a normal night. It all made the picture even emptier. A typical missing person case usually leaves at least one anomaly: a footprint, an object, a sound someone overheard by chance. This one had none. Trailer park to the east reported no strangers. Houses near the school saw no unusual comings or goings when Ayanna left the meeting. The woman near the transformer station said she went to bed early and heard nothing but wind. A young man heading home only saw a vehicle's silhouette far down the hill, but he couldn't recall the color, the turn it took, or whether it was even that night or the one before. As the sun rose higher, the teams returned to the rally point. Every report was identical: no sign of where Ayanna had gone. No vehicle on the road, no physical trace, no reliable witness, no screams, no struggle, no screech of brakes. Just a quiet night, too quiet, the kind that made anyone shiver. Police circled the map, marked the searched areas, and realized the most important part: the road she took leaving the settlement was actually the starting point of silence, not a path to clues. One officer wrote coldly in the report: no clear signs, direction of travel, undetermined. And that very silence of the scene, empty, clean to an unreasonable degree, sparked the deepest unease. It felt as if no disappearance had ever happened, as if a person had simply vanished from the world without leaving any trail to follow. In the hours that followed, tribal police went door to door again, revisiting every cabin, every house, every stretch of road in the community, to re-ask anyone who might have seen or heard something the night Ayanna disappeared. They hoped for one small clue, just one detail that fit the bigger picture. But what they collected only made everything more confusing. An elderly woman who lived right by the dirt road said she saw headlights sweep gently across her window around the time Ayanna left the meeting. She wasn't sure it was Ayanna's vehicle, but the light moved slower than usual, as if the driver were hesitating or searching for something in the dark. When police asked for a specific time, she could only say before bedtime, too broad to be useful. A teenager who lived not far from the community center told a different story. He said he saw Ayanna walking on the road just after dusk, not riding. According to him, she wore a hat, walked quickly, and didn't look side to side. But when police asked, "Are you sure it was last night and not the night before?" he hesitated and admitted he couldn't be certain. He might be mixing it up because lots of people walked that road in the evenings. A truck driver who hauls through the reservation said he saw someone in a light-colored top standing beside a vehicle on the shoulder, sometime in the middle of the night. He thought it might have been a woman and possibly Ayanna, but he also admitted he only caught a silhouette in his distant headlights and road dust. When asked about the vehicle's direction, color, or any specific detail, the driver could only shake his head. "I was moving fast, didn't get a good look." Another man who lived on the edge of the hill told the story that caught police attention most, yet was the vaguest. He heard two people arguing quietly, like urgent whispering, very late. He couldn't tell if the voices were male, female, or both. He only remembered the sound vanished quickly into the night wind. When asked if he was sure it was the night Ayanna went missing, he replied, "It could have been that night, or one close to it. Summer nights here all feel the same." A separate group of young people remembered an entirely contradictory chain of events. They insisted they saw a vehicle speeding through the area near midnight, headlights blazing into the tree line. But when police asked basic questions, which direction, sedan or pickup, how many people inside, each person gave a different answer. One said it turned onto a dirt road, another said it went straight toward the highway, a third remembered a light color, but someone else swore it was dark. Every statement, when stitched into a timeline, created a new dead-end branch. The detective wrote in his notebook, "No two statements match. No one recalls exact timing. No event can be cross-confirmed. That wasn't unusual for a nighttime disappearance, but the level of discrepancy almost destroyed the entire timeline. People in Pine Ridge were used to navigating by feel rather than clocks, and on windy nights sounds, lights, and movement were easily distorted. But here, the mismatch of memories wasn't just a little off. The pieces didn't belong to the same picture. One person was certain they heard an engine rev. Another insisted almost no vehicles passed that night. One said they saw Ayanna walking. Another believed she drove. The trucker saw a figure beside a vehicle. The nearby resident heard nothing but wind. Everything had some credibility, yet couldn't all be true at once. When tribal police tried to place the statements on the same timeline, chaos emerged. One moment had extra minutes, another was missing hours, one event happened too early to connect to the next, one sound was heard from a location that geographically it couldn't reach. And that chaos, the inconsistency of memory, timing, and what people thought they saw, created the first ominous tone in the case file. Not only had Ayanna vanished, but the entire night seemed to vanish with her. What people remembered felt torn apart, no longer part of the same timeline. They were fragments, each seeming real, yet together forming something impossible. The search expanded on the morning of the second day, when tribal police realized every witness statement was leading them into an unresolvable tangle. No single direction was solid enough to prioritize, so they widened the radius beyond the original community area, dividing teams into concentric circles half a mile apart. Searchers pushed farther than familiar boundaries, past chain-link fences, along old dirt tracks, up dusty ridges of scorched grass. The rough map was updated constantly, searched zones marked in colored chalk on a plastic board mounted behind a patrol truck. Each team hoped to be the first to spot something concrete, an item, a footprint, even an odd patch of earth. But by late morning, there was still only vast emptiness and the smell of hot dust rising from the ground. Early that afternoon, the southern team, the farthest out, radioed headquarters. They had found a dark-colored pickup parked on a remote dirt stretch about 3 miles from the community center. It was Ayanna's truck. The news instantly shifted the entire operation's pace. Everyone knew this was the first major lead in 2 days, but the truck's location stunned them more than it relieved them. It wasn't the direction her friends saw her take. It didn't match the teenager's claim of seeing her walk. It contradicted the trucker's idea of where he saw a figure on the shoulder. The truck sat in a completely opposite direction, as if someone had deliberately placed it somewhere unrelated to the initial information. The stretch where it was found was a rarely used spur, rough and rutted, flanked by dry brush and broken rock. Almost no one had reason to drive it. Locals only used that road for bonfires, rabbit hunting, or to avoid strong wind. It led nowhere, wasn't a shortcut to anything. When the team approached, the truck sat silent under harsh sunlight, coated in a thin layer of dust as if it had been there for hours, possibly since the night before. No skid marks, no hard braking, nothing to suggest it had navigated the rough stretch in haste or desperation. It looked hand-placed. Exact position, exact angle, exact distance from the edge. One officer bent to examine the driver's door handle and frowned. The driver's door was locked, but the passenger door was ajar, just a thin gap, enough to tell it hadn't been opened by wind. That immediately felt off. Ayanna never left doors unlocked. She always secured both sides because the area wasn't safe at night. When an officer tried the handle, it swung open too easily, as if someone had closed it hurriedly without making sure it latched. The cab still smelled of road dust and engine oil, but showed no signs of activity, nothing scattered, no struggle, nothing violently disturbed. Yet it was the unnatural neatness that made police pause longest. A vehicle abandoned in an emergency usually shows obvious chaos. Seat pushed back, door flung wide, items on the floor. This one was too clean, too precisely placed, too calm. An officer standing outside peered through the dusty windshield and said something everyone would later remember. It looks like the truck was parked by someone, not her. A long silence followed. They all knew it was too early for conclusions, too little data, too many possibilities, but they felt the same thing. The truck was in the wrong place, wrong direction, wrong logic. It fit no statement and none of Ayanna's travel habits. Every theory led to the same chill. This wasn't where she stopped on her own. Like a cold current running through the search team, that unspoken thought quickly formed the first real suspicion. Someone had brought the truck here. The vehicle wasn't just a clue, it was the first signal that this disappearance wasn't a simple voluntary leaving, but something staged, or at least tampered with by a third hand. In the glaring sun and hot wind whipping along the dirt road, the search team stood quietly in front of the truck, as if it were whispering something no one yet understood. A deeper silence began to settle over the entire search from that moment. Once Ayana's truck was located, the entire team shifted to a slower, more meticulous sweep of the surrounding area. The ground was hard and dusty, making tracks difficult to read, but from a few meters away, one officer spotted something odd, a jacket lying beside a low bush, just 2 steps from the truck. The problem wasn't that the jacket was there, that could happen if Ayana got out and dropped it, but how it was placed. It wasn't crumpled, dragged, or heavily soiled. It was neatly folded, as if set down deliberately with 2 hands rather than dropped in panic or haste. Ayana never folded her jacket while walking. Friends said she usually tied it around her waist or draped it over a shoulder. The sight of a perfectly folded jacket in the middle of a dusty, grassy track instantly made the officers exchange uneasy glances, though no one spoke yet. Not far away, about 15 meters from the jacket, another searcher called out. On the dry ground, under the harsh afternoon light, a green scrunchie lay alone. It was the kind Ayana often wore, but its position made no sense. Too far from the jacket. If jacket and scrunchie had fallen at the same time accidentally or yanked off, they couldn't be so separated. Even more telling, the scrunchie was placed where it was impossible to miss, as if meant to be noticed. An officer crouched to examine it, and saw it had no mud or wet dirt, only a light dusting on the surface, as if gently tossed onto the dry ground. No sign of being pulled off, dropped while running, or snagged on branches. It looked placed. Continuing the wider sweep, another searcher found a small piece of faded denim fabric near the road's edge. Threads were frayed at the tier, but there was no immediate way to confirm it belonged to Ayana. In many missing person cases, fabric scraps suggest impact or struggle, but here the piece was unusually clean, no clinging brush or thorn scratches, as if clothing had been ripped forcefully. Even the tier showed no clear evidence of violent tugging. Again, it felt more like something brought and left behind than dropped in chaos. Across the ground around all 3 items, tribal police noticed something even more unsettling. Most footprints had been blurred. Dusty areas normally hold clear prints if someone walked at night while the surface was still soft from dew, but here, there were only faint smudges, a few drag lines across the dirt, not enough shape to measure, not enough depth to determine direction. One officer tested the soil with a stick, and realized the blurred prints weren't caused by wind or nature. They looked lightly swept with a foot or stick, erasing edges but leaving faint traces. In real crime scenes, footprints like that usually point to 2 possibilities. Either the person walked extraordinarily lightly, or someone deliberately tried to erase them. And the first possibility, on a rocky, uneven stretch, was virtually zero. As the search team paused to take in everything they had just seen, an indescribable feeling hung in the air. Nothing about this scene felt natural. The jacket was placed as neatly as if it were in a closet. The scrunchie lay too far away, and was unbelievably clean. The denim scrap showed none of the characteristics of something dropped in chaos, and all the footprints around it, the very things that should have told them what happened, had been blurred to the point of near uselessness. A young officer shook his head slightly and said under his breath, just loud enough for those nearby to hear, "This doesn't look like a real scene." Another standing next to him added, "These things feel like they were put here for us to find." A heavy silence fell. Officially, they weren't allowed to conclude or use the word staged without clear evidence, but the gut instinct of officers who had seen dozens of missing persons and crime cases in the area told them something was completely off. The items were scattered too perfect to be random, yet too sloppy to be professional misdirection. It sat in that dangerous middle ground, suggestive of a fake story while hiding the real one. None of them knew at the time that they were looking at the first layer of an intentionally arranged scene, and that the strange distances between these objects would later become the pivotal point that unlocked the most complex chain of investigative twists in the entire Ayana Red Cloud case. But at that moment, standing under the harsh afternoon sun with dust blowing in their faces, they only knew one thing: everything about this scene was wrong, starting with the way it was laid out. From the moment Ayana's truck was found in a direction completely opposite to where she had left the meeting, tribal police understood they had entered the hardest phase of any missing person case, the blank 48-hour window that no one could explain, confirm, or reconstruct seamlessly. All they knew for certain was the starting point. Ayana left the community meeting just after dark, moving a little hurriedly, looking anxious, repeatedly glancing over her shoulder. A friend was the last to see her walking toward the road out of the settlement, but from that instant, everything seemed swallowed by the night. The first task was to rebuild Ayana's movement timeline. If she got straight into her truck after leaving the meeting, it would have taken her about 3 minutes to reach the main road, and a few more to the small junction heading south. A left turn would get her home in 8 minutes total, yet the truck was found in the opposite direction, a route she had no reason to take. Family members said Ayanna rarely drove that southern dirt stretch at night because of frequent wildlife and rough terrain. If she was visiting a friend, she would turn west. If she needed gas or the nearby trading post, she would head east. There was no logical scenario in which she would voluntarily drive to where the truck was found. So investigators established an initial time window from when Ayanna left the meeting to when the truck appeared on that remote spur. The minimum was 20 minutes. The maximum was unknown, because no one saw the truck moving and there were no traffic cameras. They revisited the witness who saw headlights around bedtime. If that really was Ayanna's truck, it could have left the settlement a significant time after her, or someone else could have driven it after she disappeared. Either way, those headlights didn't explain why the truck ended up south instead of the direction she was walking. The second complicating detail was just as messy. The teenager who claimed he saw Ayanna walking. If he was right, she never got into her truck and may have been intercepted. But if she was on foot, how did the truck found miles away get moved? Who drove it? That time period had no answers. Then the long-haul trucker's statement about seeing a figure standing next to a vehicle pushed the timeline into even greater confusion. If he saw what he remembered, Ayanna's truck was already on that spur the first night, or at least before dawn. Yet the search team the next morning had not seen the truck when they swept the nearest areas, or had they simply not gone far enough. 3 miles wasn't extreme, but in total darkness with high wind, sounds distort, and lights blend into the vast emptiness. So police began asking a critical question: was the truck moved twice? Another possibility, vague but not excludable, was that the truck was brought to its final spot after the search teams had already cleared the surrounding area the previous morning. If so, someone had returned to the scene, chosen a remote location, and placed the truck like a fake clue. That would match the unnatural neatness inside, and the passenger door left only slightly ajar. Though there was no hard proof yet, the thought sent chills down the team's spines. Someone might be watching the search and using the blank window to stage the scene on their terms. And then came the final element that made the first 48 hours the most baffling. Another vehicle had been in the area at the critical moment. A resident near the road to BIA 27, when pressed further, recalled seeing a strange vehicle pass the night Ayanna vanished. Not a local truck, he said. Bright headlights, driving slow, like it was looking for the way. When asked about color or make, he only vaguely remembered, maybe a pickup, maybe an older SUV, its shape obscured by dust and darkness, but he was certain of one thing. I never heard Ayanna's motorcycle that night, only that other truck. That unknown vehicle, if real, could be the only missing link in the mysterious 48-hour chain. It could be directly tied to how Ayanna's truck ended up on the spur. It could explain the faint arguing one resident heard. It could be the headlights the elderly woman saw. It could be the vehicle of whoever orchestrated everything. Or it could be a bizarre disconnected coincidence. But in a disappearance like this, coincidence is often the most dangerous thing of all. By the end of day 2, one thought began echoing inside tribal police. Not only had Ayanna vanished, the entire 48-hour period surrounding her disappearance had been distorted, concealed, or altered by another hand. No timeline held firm, nothing lined up with anything else, and when a blank window of time cannot be explained, it is usually the first sign that the real truth lies somewhere else, somewhere no one at the time had enough data to see. In the days that followed, the search continued, but the atmosphere inside tribal police headquarters began to shift. What they had, the truck placed in the wrong direction, the neatly folded jacket, the oddly distant scrunchie, the unidentified denim scrap, and 48 empty hours, all pointed to something wrong. Yet none of it amounted to solid evidence. No body, no clear signs of struggle, no witness to an abduction, no cameras or digital trail, no motive, no prior threats, no known conflict. Under 1995 legal standards, it was simply a puzzling missing person case, not enough to escalate to a criminal investigation, and that very ambiguity pushed the case into its first dead end. Tribal police had to file a preliminary report for the Bureau of Indian Affairs. In it they listed possibilities. Ayanna left voluntarily, Ayanna had an accident and was taken away by someone, Ayanna was abducted, Ayanna hitched a ride with a stranger and disappeared, but none had supporting evidence, and more importantly, none could be fully ruled out. A missing person case is only upgraded to a criminal investigation when there are signs a crime occurred. The signs here were faint, and under the standards of the time, they remained scattered pieces, insufficient to force a deeper probe. No blood, no drag marks, no cries for help, No physical evidence of violence. Everything was empty, and that emptiness became the biggest barrier. In internal meetings, the night duty officer repeated how wrong the truck scene felt. Another mentioned the distance between jacket and scrunchie. Someone else pointed out the footprints that looked deliberately blurred, but all of it was just instinct. Procedure required classification based on tangible evidence, not unproven hunches. An older officer said the line that silenced the room, "Until we have proof of a crime, this is still just a missing person case." The younger searchers exchanged frustrated looks but couldn't argue. They knew the rules, they knew the law, and they knew that without a new break, the case would soon be frozen. And that is exactly what happened in the weeks that followed. With no new information, the search began to shrink. Volunteer groups gradually stopped showing up because there was nothing left to look for. Areas searched early on were marked cleared, even though no one was truly certain. Some items were sent for basic lab work, but in that era, there was no modern technology for touch DNA or contact DNA. Fabric, hair, fibers, soil, all came back inconclusive. Every sample was labeled, sealed with simple tape, coated, and placed in brown paper boxes. No one knew those very items would become the foundation for solving the case 3 decades later. At the time, they were simply not enough to move the investigation forward. Ayanna's family called the station every day, asking the same question police could never answer. Any new leads? And every time, the answer was the same. We're still looking. No one wanted to say we have nothing, but that was the truth. 1 week passed, then 2. Farther areas were searched, yielding only wind, dust, scorched grass and hopelessness. When nearly a month had gone by, a final meeting was held, and the case was officially stamped with 2 cold words: missing, unresolved. Shortly afterward, Ayanna Redcloud's file was moved to a metal cabinet in the back storage room. Case number in black ink, notes brief, no trace, no verified witnesses, direction of travel undetermined, no criminal element confirmed. The evidence box containing the jacket, scrunchie, denim scrap, and a few items from the truck was placed on a shelf, sealed to the simple standards of the time. No anti-contamination labels, no modern evidence boxes, just an old cardboard box, brown tape, handwriting that would fade over the years. A young officer watched the box go onto the shelf, feeling something was off, but having no solid reason to object. On paper, they had done everything by the book. They had searched, they had interviewed, they had swept the area, but sometimes doing everything right also means there is nothing more you can do. And so the Ayanna Redcloud case, a strange, empty, contradictory disappearance, officially entered the same fate as hundreds of others on reservations across the country. First freeze, locked between folders, silent under dust, waiting for something that no one knew would ever come. No one then understood that the evidence being boxed away would be the key to solving it. No one knew the faint traces would become the foundation for a modern investigative breakthrough. But at that moment, every door was closed, and Ayanna's disappearance officially entered its longest phase, silence in the darkness of unsolved files. By the time Ayanna Redcloud's file reached its 7th, then 8th year, it had taken on the familiar shape of a forgotten missing person case, a thick manila folder, edges slightly worn, held together by an old metal clip, passed from officer to officer as required paperwork, but no one ever had time to really dig in. From 2002 to around 2015, Pine Ridge Reservation went through many changes: staff turnover, resource shortages, surges and drops in other cases that forced tribal police to prioritize more urgent incidents. Ayanna's file just sat there, not enough data to reopen, but not irrelevant enough to archive completely. It drifted farther back in the cabinet where light rarely reached. New investigators assigned to review old cases for training would open it, read the first few pages, flip through the mismatched statements, glance at the grainy film photos of the scene: a neatly folded jacket, a scrunchie at an absurd distance, a dusty truck in a direction unrelated to Ayanna's route. Then they closed it, not because they didn't care, but because without new evidence there was no way to push the case forward. Those investigators came and went, their names scribbled in the corner like silent timestamps: reviewed 2003, reviewed 2007, reviewed 2012, all ending with the same 3 words: no new leads. Over the years of transfers, the carelessness of that era began to show. During a 2009 evidence locker inventory, a problem surfaced. Some of Ayanna's items had been stored in the wrong box. The jacket and scrunchie were correctly numbered, but the denim scrap was mixed in with evidence from an unrelated 1996 bar fight. No one knew when the mix-up happened or who had reorganized the locker. Since modern forensics wasn't widespread yet, Staff simply noted wrong box, returned to correct location, and moved on. No one realized that small mistake would later become a crucial link in the biggest twist of the eventual reinvestigation. Also during that 2009 inventory, a young officer stumbled across a handwritten note clipped between two old pages, almost forgotten. The ink had faded, the paper yellowed, but the words were still legible. Truck not in the right place, no name, no date, no explanation, just one short sentence, like a whisper from someone who had looked at the case and felt the same thing the original investigators did, but never got the chance to dig deeper. The note was re-clipped into the file like a stray memory of unknown origin. No one then recognized its importance, but years later, it would become the key that shattered the fractured timeline and sent the case in a completely new direction. Between 2002 and 2015, DNA technology was advancing rapidly, but at Pine Ridge, with limited resources and a constant flow of new cases, Ayanna's evidence was never prioritized for deeper analysis. The old items, jacket, scrunchie, denim, were kept in simple sealed bags, not degradation-proof, not modern standard. The smell of old paper, tape, and storage room dust became the signature scent of unsolved cases. A few younger investigators wanted to reopen the file but always stopped at the same wall. No body to prove foul play, no viable suspect, no credible witness, no clear motive. Real-world pressure forced them back to cases with tangible evidence. Older officers occasionally referred to Ayanna's case as a cut that never heals, not big enough to investigate but enough to bother them whenever they glimpsed the case number. Then around 2014 some units began adopting more advanced forensic tech, but Ayanna's file still wasn't touched. It was too old, evidence too thin, no guaranteed DNA, no foundation for the genealogical matching that would come later. In short, it lacked everything a modern lab needed to take it on, and so it stayed, shifted between cabinet shelves, retaped, opened, skimmed a few pages, closed again. New investigators looked at it and felt something was wrong, but they also quickly learned that feeling cannot replace evidence. The pieces were too loose to form a picture. The Ayanna Red Cloud case officially entered its second deep freeze, 13 years of no one looking closely, no one asking new questions, and no one knowing that every scattered fragment in the file was waiting for a new generation of technology and a new set of investigative eyes to see what 1995 had missed. And inside that old sealed box, the note that read "Truck not in the right place" lay silent, waiting for the day it would finally be understood. In 2025, Pine Ridge Reservation entered a period of major change in handling cold cases. Next-generation DNA sequencing technology began reaching reservations through federal partnerships, and a special program was launched, a full review of all unresolved missing person cases from the past 3 decades. The newly formed cold case unit was small, but it was led by an investigator with exceptional reputation and persistence, Detective Marissa Lonehorse. She was one of the few who grew up right there on Pine Ridge, and had witnessed since childhood the helplessness of Native communities when someone disappeared without real attention. Marissa understood that feeling better than anyone. Her own aunt's 1988 disappearance had never been solved. That was what drove her to devote her entire career to reopening cases others deemed impossible. During the February 2025 review campaign, Marissa placed nearly 40 files on her desk. Some were missing too much data, others had no evidence left. A few had parts of the file lost to earlier mistakes. But when she opened file 1995-27, victim Ayanna Red Cloud, she immediately sensed something different, something no other file had. First, the case was riddled with contradictions, not huge ones but tiny disconnected fragments that made the whole thing feel like a clock taken apart gear by gear and reassembled wrong. One witness saw a vehicle, another saw none. Someone saw Ayanna walking, yet another heard the sound of her leaving in her truck. The long-haul trucker saw a figure next to a vehicle, while the next morning's search team found no such trace. The timing of faint arguing didn't match the headlights the elderly woman remembered. Second, what Marissa called placement traces: the neatly folded jacket, the scrunchie too far away to make sense, the impossibly clean denim scrap, the blurred footprints. In her career she had seen plenty of amateur staged scenes. Someone leaves an item to mislead, another tries to erase tracks but creates stranger anomalies. But Ayanna's scene carried an intentionality that was incomplete, enough to make an observer feel something was off, yet not enough to prove crime. That was why the case had been frozen, and it was exactly why Marissa couldn't look away. She reread every statement. She studied every old film photo of the scene, grainy, poorly lit, but still clear enough to reveal the strange precision in how the items were scattered around the truck. Marissa took constant notes, every page filled with more handwriting, not natural, illogical distance, footprints swept, truck repositioned. At the very end of the file, Marissa stopped at the scrap of paper many before her had treated as extraneous. Truck not in the right place. She lifted the note, held it close to read the nearly faded letters. What struck her wasn't the words themselves, but the powerful sense that whoever wrote this had seen what every official report had missed. The truck wasn't simply found, it had been placed, and if the truck was not in the right place, who put it there, why there, and when? In just a few hours of reading the file, Ayanna's case became the only one that commanded Marissa's full attention. While most other cases had a clear direction, accident, runaway, or targeted crime, Ayanna's felt like a puzzle with pieces deliberately missing or misplaced. Something had happened that night, but every fragment of truth had been set in the wrong place, turning it into a sealed maze. On the third day of the review, Marissa made the most important decision of the early phase: re-examine every single piece of evidence. She went down to the storage room where rows of faded brown cardboard boxes sat labeled in washed-out ink. Ayanna's box was still there, surface yellowed, corners frayed from decades of being moved around. When Marissa opened it, her first feeling was disappointment. The evidence was shockingly sparse. Just a few plastic bags holding the jacket, the scrunchie, the denim scrap, and some papers recovered from the truck. No blood, no fingerprints, no recorded signs of violence. But as she lifted each item and checked the seals, something made her freeze. The bag containing the denim scrap had clearly been opened and resealed. The brown tape was uneven, the cut not matching original 1990s standards. She noted it down, sensing something was wrong. That scrap had once been misfiled, then returned incorrectly. In many cases, such mishandling wouldn't matter. But in a case where the scene was suspected of being staged, any tampering could carry huge meaning. Marissa knew that evidence this old, examined only with the naked eye, would tell her almost nothing. But in 2025 she had something the 1995 investigators did not. Othram, the lab that specialized in cold case DNA, and was famous for extracting profiles from the oldest, most degraded items using just a few remaining molecules. Without hesitation, Marissa called her supervisor. "We need to send every piece of evidence in the Ayanna Red Cloud case to Othram, all of it." Her supervisor paused, then asked, "Is there enough to justify the cost?" Marissa answered simply, "Yes, because everything that never made sense before suddenly makes sense if this was staged." That same afternoon she finished the paperwork and filed an expedited DNA analysis request. She listed the year of disappearance, every item of evidence, and described the scene's irregularities. On the final line of the submission to Othram she wrote, "Priority, high. Evidence may contain touch DNA or mixed DNA. Case shows signs of staged environment." As she resealed the evidence box with fresh tape, Marissa Lonehorse knew one thing for certain: the Ayanna Red Cloud case was no longer a forgotten missing person file gathering dust. It had officially been reopened, this time with better technology, better data, and a determination to leave no detail unexamined. And she had no idea that the decision to send that evidence would trigger a chain of events that would completely rewrite the understanding of the case and shake the entire Pine Ridge community once again. When Ayanna Red Cloud's evidence box arrived at Othram, the technicians there were already used to decades-old cases like this. Disappearances with no blood, no weapon, no obvious trace, just a handful of seemingly useless items. But Othram existed for one reason: those useless items sometimes still held DNA molecules that people 30 years earlier couldn't see. And Ayanna's turned out to be exactly that kind of case. Scrunchie, the first trace to surface. The first item analyzed was the green scrunchie, small but usually rich in contact DNA. When the technician opened the bag and placed it under the microscope, they saw worn fabric but still plenty of skin cells clinging to the inner band. Using the wet vacuum method, they pulled out molecules trapped in the cloth for 30 years. The result left Marissa Lonehorse speechless. Male DNA, not Ayanna's, not female, clearly male, independent profile. This was the first proof that a man had handled the scrunchie at very close range, something normally only done by the wearer or someone standing inches away. Othram sent Marissa an interim report. Male profile extracted. High confidence. For a disappearance that had never been classified as criminal, this was like opening a brand new door. But it was only the first trace. Denim scrap. Second trace. Weaker. The technicians moved to the most questionable item, the denim scrap that had been misfiled in 2009. Denim is tough fabric. DNA struggles to adhere and survive 3 decades. They weren't expecting much, but after 3 extraction attempts, they finally recovered an extremely faint profile, and once again the team froze. A second male DNA profile did not match the male DNA from the scrunchie. In other words, two different men had left DNA on two different items. Marissa read that line 4 times. If everything was natural, that meant at least 2 men had handled Ayanna's belongings before or during her disappearance. But if the scene was staged, as everything suggested, then 2 separate male profiles opened a far bigger possibility. 2 men had been involved in arranging the scene. But it went even further. Cassette tape from the truck. Third DNA. When they reached the third item, Marissa could hardly believe an old cassette tape could still hold DNA. It had sat in the truck for 30 years, exposed to heat, dew, wind, and multiple evidence transfers, yet Othram technicians knew tapes can retain traces on the edges, buttons, or metal rims. The first 2 runs were too weak. On the third, using hybrid capture, they finally pulled a partial profile. Marissa received the email at 3 a.m., 20 DNA from a third individual, also male. This pushed the case to an entirely new level. Not just 2, possibly 3 men directly or indirectly tied to the evidence, but the truth still wasn't finished. Cigarette butt, the strangest trace of all. Inside the evidence box, Marissa had noticed one tiny item no one had ever cared about, a cigarette butt recovered from the truck floor. In 1995, it wasn't even noted as significant. Cigarettes in vehicles were normal, and police weren't sure it belonged to Ayanna or was just trash. But Othram analyzes everything. When they ran DNA from the filter, the lab went quiet. 20 DNA belonging to a man who died in 2011. The technician attached a federal death record, male. This created a twist no one saw coming. One of the DNA profiles found inside Ayanna's truck belonged to a man dead for 14 years. Marissa stared at the report in silence for minutes. Not because the DNA came from a deceased person, that happens in cold cases, but because of how it got there. If the man died in 2011, his DNA on the cigarette had to be deposited before 2011. The butt had either been in Ayanna's truck from the beginning, someone later placed a cigarette containing his DNA into the truck to contaminate the scene. The third possibility was ice cold. Someone had deliberately mixed the DNA of a dead man into the evidence to mislead investigators. If that was true, the separate male profiles on the scrunchie and denim could also be the result of intentional planting. When the 3 traces converged, Marissa understood what was happening. 3 male DNA profiles, 1 partial profile from a possible third man, 1 profile from a man dead since 2011, a scattered scene, items that appeared deliberately misplaced, a denim scrap that had been moved between boxes. A much larger picture was emerging. Ayanna's case was not just a disappearance, it was a manipulated scene, intentional, calculated, and involving multiple people. Othram closed the interim report with a striking note. The mixed DNA profile suggests multiple male contributors, not accidental, not environmental, high likelihood of direct contact. Marissa Lonehorse read that line 3 times. For 30 years, no one had evidence to elevate Ayanna's case from missing person to suspected crime, but now, in just days of analysis, the evidence had blown past reasonable suspicion and landed squarely in criminal classification, and this was only the beginning. Marissa knew what lay ahead was far more complex. Forensic genealogy, family tree matching, and tracing every man in this bizarre DNA chain. The door to the truth had opened, but only enough to reveal the shadow of a bigger, darker, and far more dangerous secret than anyone had ever imagined in the disappearance of Ayanna Red Cloud. When the 3 DNA profiles were sent to Othram's genealogy division, the team got to work immediately. Forensic genealogy isn't just matching DNA to one person, it's reverse engineering family trees, bloodlines, and distant connections to build a genetic map and identify who among them could have had direct contact with the evidence. Ayanna's case had 3 separate male samples, making the task exponentially harder. But that same complexity created a broader picture, the first real picture since 1995, that could finally pull the case out of the dark. The first analysis returned to Marissa Lonehorse, a long list of tribal surnames across South Dakota, Wyoming, and parts of Nebraska. The algorithms identified the 3 family clusters with the highest genetic overlap for the strongest sample, the scrunchie DNA, Little Elk, Hollow Bird, and a small branch of Big Crow. Of those, Hollow Bird matched the most, so strongly that the genealogist noted, high probability of recent relation. On land like Pine Ridge, surnames aren't just names, they carry generations of community history and interconnected families that both helped narrow the search and made it messier because relatives can spread wide horizontally. 3 overlapping clusters meant the scrunchie DNA almost certainly belonged to someone from one of those families, but the second, weaker sample from the denim pointed somewhere completely different. After multiple reprocessing runs, the denim DNA matched most closely, not to Hollowbird, but to a lesser-known branch of the Two Mountains family, a clan that lived right beside the dirt road where the truck was found. That raised a chilling possibility. Not one man, but at least two men from two entirely separate families had left DNA on the evidence. A coincidence that large was almost impossible. If everything had happened naturally, Marissa felt the pieces clicking together with a slow, heavy sound, signaling that the truth behind Ayanna's disappearance was far more complicated than anyone had ever imagined. Then the genealogy team sent the third report, the partial profile from the cassette tape. It was too degraded for an exact source, but strong enough to show a distant tie to the Hollowbird line through the maternal side, not paternal. That led to a bold conclusion. A loose group of men related through extended family, not necessarily close, had either touched the evidence or been present the night Ayanna vanished. Othram produced a massive 3-generation family tree chart and underlined every male of suitable age in 1995. When the list came back, Marissa counted 12 men. 12 men, aged 19 to 55 at the time of the disappearance, all genetically linked to the DNA found on the evidence. She stared at the number 12 for a long time. It wasn't an official suspect list yet, but it was the first time the investigation had a real shape. Othram added more details. Of the 12, 7 lived near the disappearance area in 1995. 3 had left the reservation years later with spotty address records. 2 were deceased. The fact that 2 dead men could match DNA on the evidence pulled Marissa straight back to the cigarette butt result. The man who died in 2011, was he tied to one of the family branches in the tree? Answer, not directly, but distantly related to Hollowbird. This opened a chilling hypothesis. The scene may have been staged using items previously handled by multiple people in the same community, people with complex blood ties, to make any DNA found unreliable. Or worse, multiple men had actually taken part in staging the scene. Over the next 3 days of analysis, the genealogy team narrowed the 12 down to 4 based on age, residence, occupation and access to the area where the truck was found in 1995. And then, among those 12 names, one stood out and seized Marissa's attention instantly. Raymond Hollowbird, 27 years old in 1995, lived just over half a mile from where the truck was found, minor criminal record, had a brother who died in 2011, matching the cigarette butt DNA, appeared in a 1994 disturbance report at the community center, and most critically, once owned a 1980 Ford pickup. When Marissa reached that last line, she nearly jumped out of her chair. A 1980 Ford pickup, exactly the type that left the faint tire impressions documented at the scene in 1995, a less common model compared to newer trucks of the time. A truck whose width and tread pattern matched the marks noted in the original file. Everything genealogy, DNA, old traces was converging on the same point. Not coincidence, not chance, a clear trail, but what sent a chill down Marissa's spine wasn't the name Raymond Hollowbird. It was the fact that the 3 DNA samples, scrunchy, denim, cassette, did not match each other. One man could be explained by chaos at the scene. 2 men could be indirect contact, but 3 different men, and one of them dead for years. It couldn't be accidental. It couldn't be error. And if Raymond was the key unlocking the first circle of suspects, the biggest question now was, what connected these 3 men to each other? And to Ayanna Red Cloud? Were they simply distant genetic links, or had they worked together to create a fake scene to hide a real crime? The case had shifted from a lone suspect to the possibility of a complex network, and Marissa knew the hardest part was only beginning. The list of 12 genealogically linked men wasn't the end goal, it was just the starting point for Marissa to rebuild the entire chain of events that had collapsed in 1995. After receiving Othram's report, she immediately moved to the next phase, screening and narrowing from 12 down to the few who could have had direct contact with Ayanna's evidence. The difficulty wasn't just the age of the data. Most of the men belonged to tightly interwoven native families, where any genetic link could be natural coincidence across generations. But Marissa had an advantage. She understood local culture, how families interacted, and especially how, 30 years earlier, not every movement or activity was officially recorded. Some information had to be dug out of old paper reports, hunting logs, vehicle trade receipts, even the memories of reservation elders. The investigation felt like reassembling a picture torn into 100 pieces, yet eventually 3 names rose above the rest. Suspect A, cleared by hunting records. The first was Derek Two Mountains, 25 in 1995, From the family branch tied to the Denham DNA, he lived near the western tree line and had easy access to the dirt road where Ayanna's truck was found. He had a minor disturbance on record in 1997, but no serious priors. He initially looked promising for 3 reasons. 1. Home location near the scene. 2. Right age. 3. Family branch matching the partial Denham DNA. To verify his whereabouts on the night of June 14, 1995, Marissa pulled federal hunting permit files. In the 1990s, many Native men registered permits to hunt in the northern areas, and those permits required logging dates and locations to stay legal. In storage, she found Derek's permit log submitted to the local ranger the morning after. He had hunted in the Porcupine Hills, 40 miles from the disappearance site. That could have been faked, but what forced Marissa to cross Derek off immediately was additional evidence: a receipt for ammunition and food from a store in Kyle, South Dakota. Time-stamped 8:52 p.m. on June 14. Kyle was a 35-minute drive from Pine Ridge. If Derek was in Kyle at 8:52 p.m., he could not have been at the community center around 9 p.m., and certainly not handling the scrunchie or denim. Marissa confirmed it with the store owner, who remembered Derek stopping by that night and talking about bad weather. The time-stamped receipt matched. Suspect A was officially cleared, though the Two Mountains genetic branch could still be indirectly involved. Derek himself, however, could not have been at the scene. Suspect B, caught lying about his whereabouts on June 14. The second was Michael Little Elk, 33 at the time of the disappearance. His genetic link was moderate, but 2 things made Marissa focus on him. When Marissa tracked Michael down and asked about the night of June 14, his answer came fast, almost rehearsed. "I was home all evening. I never went out." It sounded normal, but a tiny note in the 1995 file almost no one had noticed said a neighbor saw Michael driving somewhere late that night. He denied it back then and no one followed up. Marissa rebuilt his timeline through old administrative and transaction records. Michael had worked as a delivery driver for a small store and had a scheduled delivery the morning of June 15. That alone was unremarkable, but in storage she found a gas receipt, dated June 14, time-stamped 9:41 p.m. The station was a 20-minute drive from his house, meaning he was not home when he claimed. When confronted again, Michael hedged and finally said, "I don't remember exactly, it was 30 years ago." Most suspicious was when Marissa asked about the vehicle he drove in 1995, an old 1979 pickup. He insisted it had been broken down since 1994 and wasn't running in 1995, yet Marissa located a 1995 registration inspection photo. The truck was still operational. Michael wasn't in the main DNA clusters like Hollow Bird, but lying about his timeline made him a serious person of interest. Still, when the scrunchie and denim DNA were compared to his medical records, no match. Marissa wrote beside his name, "No DNA match, but possible indirect involvement." Michael was removed from the direct suspect pool, but kept on watch for inconsistent statements. Suspect C, Raymond Hollow Bird, the center of every gap. Finally, Marissa returned to the name that had stood out from the beginning, Raymond Hollow Bird, 27 in 1995, closest genetic match to the scrunchie DNA, lived roughly half a mile from where the truck was found, owned a 1980 Ford pickup, matching the tire impressions noted in the 1995 report. Brother Elias was the man who died in 2011, matching the cigarette butt DNA. Marissa brought Raymond in for questioning, hoping he could explain the gaps. Within minutes, she realized Raymond was lying, repeatedly, and badly. Raymond claimed he spent the night of June 14 at a small party at a friend's house. When asked who hosted, he named the wrong person. When asked who was there, he named someone who had moved away in 1993. When asked what time he got home, he changed from 11 p.m. to almost midnight. Every answer shifted. Contradiction 2. The Ford pickup. Asked about the 1980 Ford, Raymond said, "I sold it in 1994, a full year before that girl went missing." South Dakota vehicle records showed the Ford was sold in 1996, 1 year after the disappearance. The final buyer confirmed Ray was still driving that truck through mid-1995. A blatant lie. Contradiction 3. The deceased brother. When Elias was mentioned, Raymond immediately grew defensive. "My brother had nothing to do with it. Don't drag his name into this," he snapped. But the cigarette butt DNA was Elias's. That left 2 possibilities. 1. Elias had been inside Ayanna's truck at some point before her disappearance. 2. Someone used an item carrying Elias's DNA to stage the scene. When Marissa asked directly, "Where was your brother that night?" Raymond answered instantly. He wasn't even on Pine Ridge. He was working out of town. Wrong. Hospital records from 1995 showed Elias had been treated for a minor car accident in Pine Ridge 2 days before the disappearance. He was still in the area when Ayanna vanished. Raymond wasn't just lying. He was desperate to avoid any mention of Elias, as if the truth there was too dangerous to admit. Contradiction 4. Body language. In years of interviewing, Marissa had learned to read physical cues. When she mentioned the scrunchie, Raymond barely reacted. When she mentioned the denim, he brushed it off. But when she slid across the 1995 photo of Ayanna's truck, Raymond looked away, bit his lip, and shifted in his seat. Innocent people don't always do that. Marissa Lone Horse's interim conclusion. After 2 weeks of deep investigation, her report concluded, Suspect A Derrick 2 Mountains cleared, solid alibi. Suspect B Michael Little Elk, suspicious, but no DNA match. Suspect 2 Raymond Hollow Bird. Primary suspect, contradictory timeline, multiple lies, DNA connection, geographic proximity, and link to the deceased brother's DNA. A case that had once been a clueless disappearance, now revolved around one name, a man. Every piece of evidence, old and new, flowed toward like water to the sea. But the real question still lay ahead. Was Raymond Hollow Bird acting alone? Or was he part of something bigger, a family network, a code of silence, or a dark truth buried for 30 years? Marissa didn't have the answer yet, but she knew this. Raymond would not escape what was coming. Among the evidence sealed, since 1995, the cassette tape was the strangest item. It had sat in Ayanna's glove box, dusty and worn, and no one believed it could hold anything useful. In 1995, police just saw the tangled tape inside, and assumed it was a cheap music cassette Ayanna played while driving. No one ever played it, no one had the tools to clean the audio, and most importantly, no one thought a cassette could hold DNA. But in 2025, the seemingly useless became pivotal, and that cassette tape opened an entirely new door in the investigation. Cleaning the tape, and discovering hidden audio. When Othram received the item, they didn't stop at DNA. They decided to restore the audio using modern technology. 30-year-old cassettes are usually warped, tangled, or demagnetized. But audio restoration experts had a new technique: high-resolution magnetic imaging. It doesn't require running the tape through a playback head. It scans the magnetic field directly on the tape's surface to reconstruct the original sound. When the tape was revived, the first thing that came out was not music, not engine noise, not static. It was a human voice, a low, slightly hoarse male voice, speaking very softly, as if whispering into a microphone. The volume was tiny, but modern processing could lift it without distortion. Othram sent Marissa the first restored segment. The recording lasted only 3.6 seconds, but it was enough to freeze her spine. She refused again. No female voice, no screaming, no traffic sounds, just one short, emotionless sentence, carrying a terrifying implication. Someone had spoken those words while sitting in the vehicle Ayanna used the night she disappeared, and a microphone had been close enough to catch it. Deeper analysis by Othram's audio team uncovered several critical details. The voice was clearly male, not Ayanna's. Not an accidental capture from radio or TV. Even volume, no vibration, meaning the speaker was extremely close to the recorder's microphone. No background wind noise, suggesting the vehicle may have been stopped. All of this pointed to one chilling possibility. Someone had used the cassette recorder in the truck to record something, accidentally or deliberately, very close to the moment Ayanna disappeared. Voice biometrics. Identifying the speaker. Once they had a voice, the next step was voice matching, voice biometrics. The technology analyzes unique vocal traits, vocal cord vibration patterns, pitch range, pause placement, baseline frequency, breath, intensity, syllable structure, typical of Lakota native speakers. Marissa had recorded Raymond Hollow Bird during his interview. It was ordinary conversation, but Raymond's voice was distinctive, slightly hoarse. Endings dropped low, not high-pitched but tense. Slight drawl on the when the 3.6-second clip was run through the comparison software, two waveform lines appeared. one yellow, one green. They did not overlap perfectly, but matched at 61% of acoustic parameters, a level high enough to trigger red flags for any investigator. Othram's report read, partial match to Raymond Hollowbird, probability moderate to high, not 100%, not legally conclusive, but enough to elevate Raymond from primary suspect to the only person likely to have spoken those words inside Ayanna's truck. The meaning of "she refused again." Marissa sat in her office replaying the sentence dozens of times, a simple phrase, yet loaded with questions. Refused what? Again, meaning this wasn't the first time. Refused whom? Why was anything being recorded in the truck? Who turned the recorder on? Was Ayanna even aware it was running? And most importantly, the wording suggested confrontation, not chance. The disappearance was starting to look like coercion, threat, or assault. The cassette tape and the story erased in 1995. Marissa went back through every original file looking for any mention of the cassette. There was none. No one wrote it down. No one ever played it. The reason was painfully simple for the time. Ayanna's truck had an auto-reverse cassette deck. If a tape jammed, people assumed it was just broken. Police had no audio recovery equipment. They never suspected the tape held investigative value. A sentence that important had lain silent inside the tape for 30 years, buried under dust and time, like a confession hanging in the air. What Marissa now understood, when she closed her laptop, 3 things were certain. 1. The cassette tape was the pivotal piece of evidence. More important than anything else, it carried a voice directly tied to the night Ayanna vanished. 2. The sentence carried the weight of coercion, not casual conversation. It implied Ayanna's resistance, and the man's frustration or anger. 3. Voice biometrics pointed in only one direction. Raymond Hollowbird. Not ironclad proof, but the strongest evidence the case had ever produced. During magnetic analysis, experts determined the segment had been recorded over an older song. That only happens when someone physically presses the record button on the cassette player. Not from vehicle vibration, not from a bad tape, not by accident. Someone had to intentionally hit record. If that someone was Raymond, the only reasons he would record became even more terrifying. He either wanted to capture something, or the recorder caught him by mistake while he was trying to do something no one was ever supposed to know about. The cassette tape, once thought meaningless, had become absolute evidence, and as Marissa listened to the sentence for the 20th time, she knew one thing. Raymond Hollowbird was no longer just a suspect. He was the only person who had ever left his voice inside the vehicle Ayanna disappeared in. And that was the moment the investigation crossed into a more dangerous phase, a point of no return. Marissa Lonehorse understood one thing clearly. Voice biometrics could open a door, but only DNA could slam it shut. She needed a fresh, legal, direct DNA sample from Raymond Hollowbird, not genealogy, not inference, but actual DNA to compare against the scrunchie and denim. She could not ask Raymond to volunteer a sample. He would never agree, especially after the contradictory interview. So Marissa chose the method many modern agencies use. Collect abandoned DNA from an item he discarded in public, completely legal, no privacy violation. The opportunity came at a small store on the reservation. 3 days after the interview, Marissa learned Raymond regularly stopped at a little store near Highway 18. Not wanting any visible police presence, she asked a BIA undercover officer to watch. At noon that day, Raymond pulled in, bought a bottle of water, opened it, took a few swallows, and tossed the bottle into an outdoor trash can. A simple act, but to Marissa, it was like someone had just tipped the perfect domino. The undercover waited until Raymond left, then recovered the bottle following strict protocol. Gloved hands, sealed evidence bag, time and location logged, preliminary report written. When the sealed bag reached the lab, Marissa felt her pulse quicken. This was the moment she had waited weeks for. Result, perfect match. Othram needed less than 48 hours. Denim, no direct match, different lineage. Cassette, partial match, consistent with voice biometrics. But the first line was everything. The scrunchie, the item most intimately tied to Ayanna, something she almost always wore in her hair, carried Raymond's DNA deep in the fabric fibers. Not faint DNA, not mixed, a full, clear profile. That meant 2 things. 1. Raymond had touched the scrunchie very close in time to Ayanna's disappearance. The contact was not casual or distant. It was direct, forceful enough to leave abundant DNA. Marissa sat staring at the screen for a long time, feeling the weight of those words. This was no longer suspicion, no longer genealogy, no longer a voice. This was absolute science. The bracelet, DNA that scrambled everything. But just when Marissa thought she finally saw a straight path to the truth, a supplemental Othram report arrived. Bracelet, DNA match, Elias Hollow Bird, deceased 2011. The bracelet, a small item found in the truck but never given any attention, an item considered unrelated because this bracelet was not on Ayana's known personal property list. So why was it in her truck? And more importantly, why was the DNA of Elias, dead since 2011, on it? That question opened two possibilities. Possibility 1. Elias had been inside Ayana's truck in 1995. If true, it meant Elias knew Ayana. Elias was near or inside the truck the night she vanished. Elias may have been directly involved in her disappearance, but here was the problem. Elias was never mentioned in any 1995 statement. No one ever reported seeing him near the community center. No one said he even knew Ayana. The silence was suspicious. Possibility 2. The bracelet was planted to mislead. If someone staged the scene, they could have placed the scrunchie in one spot, placed the denim elsewhere, blurred footprints, introduced unrelated evidence into the truck, and now, placed a bracelet carrying a dead man's DNA inside the vehicle. If true, whoever staged it knew Elias's DNA could never lead anywhere, because he was already dead. A perfect red herring, but that led to a third, most terrifying possibility. Possibility 3. Both Hollowbird brothers were involved. Both Raymond and Elias had DNA on separate items of evidence. Raymond also had the voice on the tape. Elias died in 2011, but that does not break the 1995 timeline. This opened a disturbing possibility. Ayana may have faced not one, but two men, and a scene someone had deliberately recreated to hide what really happened. Why was this a closed trap? Marissa wrote 3 short lines in her notebook. Scrunchie row Rye, 100%. Bracelet row Elias, 100%. Voice biometrics row Ray, partial. The case was no longer a straight line. It had become a sealed spiral. Row DNA pulled everything toward Raymond. Elias's DNA opened a second branch. The staged scene dragged every suspicion back to Raymond. Every clue split into 2 directions. But every direction ultimately flowed to the same center, the Hollowbird family. Looking at the investigation board on the wall, Marissa realized something horrifying. It may not have been just one person, but an entire family structure, a network, a secret protected by 30 years of silence, and Raymond, no matter how hard he tried to deny it, now stood in a position he could not escape. DNA had bound him, undeniable, inexplicable, inescapable. The trap had snapped shut. There was no way back. In the days after the new DNA results came in, Marissa Lonehorse barely left the investigation room. Every document, map, DNA chart, scene photo, and timeline was spread across the east wall, a wall that made anyone who entered stop for a few seconds just to breathe. Because one thing had become clearer than ever. Only one man could not have been at the scene the night Ayana disappeared. The scrunchie carried Raymond's DNA. The bracelet carried the DNA of his brother Elias, dead since 2011. The cassette tape carried a voice that strongly resembled Raymond's, and the denim fragment hinted at yet another person from a different lineage. 2 men may have been present, Raymond and his brother Elias. The DNA puzzle revealed what no one saw 30 years earlier. Marissa pinned 2 photos to the board, one of Raymond, one of Elias. Their faces were strikingly similar. Same long features, same evasive eyes, same high, slightly hooked nose typical of the Hollowbird line. But DNA does not lie, and DNA could not appear in Ayana's truck unless both were involved. Hypotheses began to form. Raymond and Elias were both there on the night of June 14, 1995. One threatened Ayana, the other staged the scene. Hypothesis 2, Raymond was the primary perpetrator, Elias only helped clean up afterward. Hypothesis 3, Elias was the main actor. Raymond helped stage and cover it up. The third was the most dangerous, and the one that could explain why Raymond had been willing to lie for 3 decades. And one more thing worried Marissa, one of the 2 was dead. That created a legal dead zone, a gray area that made charging the living one far harder. A good defense attorney could easily argue that Elias's DNA was the primary indicator, and if Elias was dead, the case could be driven into a dead end. Marissa could not let that happen. An old statement opened a new twist. While re-examining the 1995 files, Marissa noticed a statement that had been dismissed as unreliable. The long-haul trucker who said he saw a figure standing next to a vehicle, but wasn't sure if it was male or female due to poor light. Now, with Elias's DNA inside the truck, that statement suddenly carried far more weight. The trucker may have seen Elias, not Ayana. which would explain why he couldn't describe the person clearly. A man standing beside a vehicle in the dark could easily be mistaken for a woman from a distance, voice, build, even movement, if the witness only caught a glimpse. And if Elias was there with Ray, everything lined up. 2 DNA profiles on the evidence. The truck moved and repositioned, footprints blurred, by 2 people moving around, items arranged in 2 different directions, as if each man brought something. The faint arguing neighbors heard that night, possibly 2 men arguing about what to do with Ayanna. The picture was expanding, but in a darker way. The community began hearing rumors, and fear returned. Rumors spread across Pine Ridge like wind across the prairie. First came whispers. Raymond's DNA was found on the scrunchie, then the bracelet tied to Elias. Then someone said they'd seen police cars at the Hollow Bird family home multiple times that week. Fear spread. People in the community had always known the Hollow Bird brothers as troublemakers, quick to argue, sometimes fighting in bars, but no one ever imagined both could be tied to a disappearance that had lasted 30 years. An elderly woman whispered to Marissa at the store, "We always thought something was off, but we didn't dare speak." Marissa realized the silence wasn't just in the files, it had lived in the community, across generations, and now as the truth began to surface, it delivered a shock no one was prepared for. The arrest warrant, and the moment the community froze, Marissa knew it was time to act. 100% DNA match, supporting voice biometrics, lying about the timeline, staged evidence, and direct signs of Elias's involvement. An emergency arrest warrant was drafted and signed by a federal judge due to Pine Ridge's mixed jurisdiction. The warrant for Raymond Hollow Bird was issued Tuesday morning at 9:14 a.m. Raymond was arrested at the auto repair shop where he worked part-time. He was standing next to an old pickup, hands covered in grease, when 3 police vehicles pulled up. An officer shouted, "Raymond Hollow Bird, you are under arrest in connection with the disappearance of Ayanna Red Cloud." Raymond turned, his face going pale. For a few seconds the shop was so quiet you could hear metal hit concrete. The other mechanics froze. One stepped back and dropped a wrench. Another muttered, "No way." Raymond did not resist. He did not yell. He did not ask why. He said only one sentence, and it sent a chill down Marissa's spine. "Elias doesn't deserve to be dragged into this." Marissa stared straight at him. "Elias is dead, Ray, but DNA isn't." Raymond lowered his head. Not another word. The first shockwave. When news of Raymond's arrest spread across the reservation, Pine Ridge reeled. Everyone feared that if Raymond was taken in, how many others were involved? And if Elias was dead, what had he taken to the grave? Some people rushed to the police station demanding answers. Many families worried about past associations with the Hollow Bird family. Elders told people don't dig up old things. But the truth was rising, and no one could stop it anymore. Because now every DNA profile, every lie, every piece of the staged scene, every "she refused again" from the cassette, all pointed to one figure standing in the night of 1995, Raymond. But there was another shadow, faint yet persistent like a ghost, standing beside him that night, Elias. The Ayanna Red Cloud case had officially entered its darkest and most complex chapter. Raymond Hollow Bird was brought into the tribal police interview room at 10:42 a.m. The small room, harsh fluorescent light shining on a cold metal table, gray walls, and a one-way mirror reflecting the wary eyes of the man sitting across from Marissa Lonehorse. She had a thick file in front of her but didn't open it yet. Raymond stared at the floor, hands clasped. He didn't look aggressive. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look innocent. He looked like a man who had been preparing for this moment for years. When Marissa started the cassette, the 3.6-second clip, "She refused again," Raymond closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. That was enough for Marissa to know he recognized the voice. But when he opened them again, Raymond began defending himself the way experienced suspects often do, throw out as many versions as possible to dilute the truth. And so 4 statements emerged, 4 completely different stories, none matching the others. Statement 1, "I don't know anything." Asked about the DNA on the scrunchie, Raymond fell back on the simplest defense. "I knew Ayanna. I might have touched her things at some community event." Marissa asked, "When did you touch the scrunchie in her hair?" Ray answered, "Can't remember, it was 30 years ago, but the scrunchie never appeared in any photos of Ayanna from community events. Moreover, the DNA was inside the fabric layers, not on the surface, proof it wasn't casual contact in a room, but direct, very close contact." Then Marissa mentioned the Ford pickup, and he quickly said, "I sold it before that." Wrong. Vehicle records proved he was lying. Marissa looked him in the eye. "Ray, that's a clear lie." Ray didn't answer, just bit his lip. Statement 1 collapsed the moment the forensic timeline hit the table, but more importantly, Ray didn't flinch. He still held that stubborn gaze, like a man hunting for the next story. Statement 2, I was there, but I didn't do anything. 30 minutes later, seeing the first version destroyed, Ray shifted tone. His voice dropped, fingers rubbing leftover grease under his nails. Okay, I was near where the truck was found, but I didn't do anything to her. Marissa stayed silent, letting Ray keep talking, the technique she had used for years. Let the suspect drift on their own current. Ray continued, I saw her truck that night, but I never touched it. I just passed by. Someone else left it there before I got there. Marissa asked, so why is your voice on the cassette tape? Ray paused, a very brief moment. Then, I don't know, maybe someone recorded my voice at a party. A ridiculous excuse. The cassette was recorded inside the truck, and audio forensics proved the record button was pressed on site. Ray was building a second story, with one goal, reduce direct involvement, but it still didn't fit the timeline. Statement 3, Elias was the one there. When Marissa placed the bracelet, the item carrying Elias's DNA on the table, Raymond changed his story for the third time. His voice trembled slightly, eyes darting to the corner as if looking for an exit. I wasn't there. Elias was the one in the truck. He might have done something, I don't know. For the first time, Raymond directly mentioned his brother. Marissa asked, are you saying Elias abducted Iyana? Ray answered, I'm not saying that, he had problems. He drank a lot. He had a temper. Maybe he did something I didn't know about. But forensics struck a killing blow. DNA on the scrunchie was Ray's, not Elias's. Voice on the cassette was Ray's, not Elias's. 1980 Ford tire tracks, Ray's truck at the time. Elias had been in a minor accident days earlier, unlikely to drive long distances. Ray had just tried to pin it on a dead man, desperate but ineffective. Marissa looked at him and said quietly but sharply, you're building a story on someone who can't defend himself. Ray lowered his head, hands clenched. Drio and Oafisen Fen. Ray Dode is a third person. When Marissa played, she refused again one more time. The sentence tore through the last of his defenses. Finally, Ray offered the fourth version, the most desperate one yet. There was another man. Not me, not Elias. That guy, he forced me to help. Marissa tilted her head. His name? Ray shook his head. I don't remember. I don't know. But he's the one who moved the truck. I just happened to be there. A brand new story with no evidence, no DNA link, nothing to back it up. Marissa said only one sentence. Ray, the forensic timeline leaves no room for a third man. Everything points to you and Elias. Ray closed his eyes and leaned back in the chair. He stopped answering. Conclusion. 4 statements, 4 false truths. Marissa wrote in her report. 1. Version 1. Total denial, contradicted by DNA. 2. Version 2. Admitted presence, contradicted by cassette tape. 3. Version 3. Blamed Elias, destroyed by forensics. 4. Version 4. A third man, contradicted by timeline. None of the versions matched the forensics. DNA, voice, truck placement, staged evidence, empty 48-hour window, scrunchy DNA that could not have drifted there by chance. Every story Ray told only added another twist, another slice of a truth he wouldn't speak. But only the forensic timeline stood unshaken, and that timeline didn't need Ray's confession to be true. When she left the interview room, Marissa knew Raymond Hollowbird had buried himself with the 4 stories he built. None of them were true, but all of them led to the same point. Ray was there. Ray touched the scrunchie. Ray spoke those words inside the truck, and Ray was hiding something about Elias. 4 statements, 4 false truths collapsed before one single truth. Forensics doesn't lie. Raymond Hollowbird's arrest sent an earthquake through Pine Ridge, but the real shockwave began only when the lawyers entered the fight. Within 2 weeks of the arrest, a defense team from Rapid City, hired by his family, arrived, people who understood that a 30-year-old case would be unlike any other. This was no longer just an investigation, it had become a legal war over science, where every DNA molecule, every principle of forensic genealogy, every word on the cassette tape would be dissected, questioned, and attacked from every angle. No trial date had even been set, but the battle had already begun in the pre-trial phase, with motions that could decide the fate of the entire case. Battle 1, Secondary Transfer. Can DNA drift? Raymond's attorneys launched their first attack on the prosecution's strongest evidence, Ray's DNA on Iyana's scrunchie. They argued, DNA can transfer indirectly. DNA can cling to clothing, car seats, shared objects. DNA does not prove violence. DNA can migrate to the scrunchie without direct contact. The term for this is a small reservation. Everyone knows each other, shares spaces, touches each other's things. Mr. Raymond Hollowbird's DNA could have reached the scrunchie through an intermediary, clothing, a couch or items at a community event. Marissa heard it and almost laughed. Not because the argument was wrong in theory, secondary transfer exists. But the forensics in this case weren't based on theory, they were based on DNA embedded deep inside the fabric layers, a concentration only direct contact could produce. The prosecution countered, "Ward, a scrunchie is not a flat surface. Secondary transfer is extremely unlikely. The DNA was inside the fabric, not on the outside. The concentration was high enough to prove direct contact. No trace of any intermediary DNA on the scrunchie, only Ray's." Finally, they delivered the closing line, "This is not drifted DNA, this is contact DNA." Battle 1. Ray lost ground, but his lawyers did not retreat. They moved to the second battlefield, where the fight exploded even harder. Battle 2. Is forensic genealogy legal? The heart of the entire case rested on forensic genealogy, the technology that uses family trees to find DNA matches. The defense knew, if they could kill its legality, the case would collapse instantly. They argued, forensic genealogy is new technology with no solid precedent. User DNA profiles on GED match or genealogy platforms may lack absolute consent. Using genealogy to identify Raymond was too indirect, not direct evidence. The technology can be inaccurate because native family trees are more complex than white population databases. Native genealogy cannot be analyzed as accurately as other population groups. Marissa felt her blood boil when she heard it, but the prosecution was ready, and their response cut like a blade. Rebuttal 1. Forensic genealogy is only used to identify a suspect, never to convict. Only after direct DNA was obtained, Ray's water bottle, was genealogy used as a roadmap. Rebuttal 2. Federal courts have admitted forensic genealogy in over 50 major cases since 2018. Rebuttal 3. Othram's dataset is optimized for native populations, no racial bias. The prosecution's strongest point, all the genealogy did was point to one name, and direct DNA confirmed that name 100%. Raymond. Rebuttal 2 ended in a clear victory for Marissa, but the defense still had one more weapon they wanted to destroy, the cassette tape. The fight over the cassette tape, was it edited? Ray's lawyers argued, a 30-year-old tape is easily degraded and distorted. The clip is only a few seconds, could have been cut or spliced. No clear proof the speaker is Ray. Audio forensics is not conclusive evidence. They even moved to suppress the tape entirely because of possible data contamination during restoration. Marissa knew this round was critical. If the cassette was thrown out, a centerpiece of evidence would vanish, and Ray would breathe much easier. The prosecution flew in an audio forensics expert from Washington, D.C., to testify. The expert explained. When greater, the cassette was analyzed using high-resolution magnetic imaging technology that reads the original magnetic field on the tape without running it through a playback head. No signs of editing, no signs of modern overdubbing. The magnetic pattern on the tape perfectly matches a 1990s cassette recorder. Volume, vocal vibration, breathing all consistent with the small space inside a truck cab. The expert ended with a sentence that silenced the courtroom. This is an original 1995 recording. No editing, no tampering. Ray's attorney pushed back. You cannot state with 100% certainty that the voice belongs to Raymond Hollowbird, but forensic voice biometrics states that Raymond is the highest probability speaker with 61% acoustic match, and forensic DNA from the scrunchie confirms Raymond had direct contact with the victim near the time the recording was made. A double blow. Battle 3. Ray kept losing. The prosecution's final argument before trial. The prosecutor summed up. Forensic genealogy. Pointed correctly. Not used for conviction. Lying about timeline. Ray. Staged evidence. Ray and Elias. Scrunchie DNA dense enough to prove direct contact. And the closing line. No single piece of evidence stands alone, but every one of them points the same way. Raymond Hollowbird. The night of June 14, 1995, inside Ayanna Red Cloud's truck, where his voice said, she refused again. When pre-trial ended, the shadow of the truth had grown too large to hide. Ray said nothing more. No request for bail. No argument. He just stared at his cuffed hands, as if finally understanding that no matter how hard the lawyers fought, forensics had closed every escape route. That night, Marissa sat at her desk, looking at Ayanna's photo. 30 years, and at last the case was heading to the trial that would decide everything, and nothing could stop it now. The trial of Raymond Hollow Bird took place in the federal courthouse in Rapid City, a building that had rarely seen a crowd this size. The gallery was packed. Pine Ridge residents, Ayanna Red Cloud's relatives, local reporters, and people who had known the Hollow Bird brothers since they were kids. The air was thick, heavy, as if everyone were holding their breath. When the jury took their seats, the prosecutor stood. He did not open with grand declarations. Instead, he held up a 1995 map of Pine Ridge, spread it on the table in front of the jury, and spoke one sentence that silenced the entire room. Today we are going to reconstruct the night of June 14, 1995, minute by minute, location by location, trace by trace. It was not an empty promise. The prosecution had prepared a complete forensic reconstruction, combining DNA, audio analysis, positioning data, and scattered witnesses, into one seamless picture, the first in 30 years. The truck, the center of all movement. The prosecutor began with Ayanna's vehicle. Photos of the old green sedan flashed on the large screen. "Pay attention," the prosecutor said. Ayanna left the community meeting around 9 p.m. His finger landed on the map at the community center. This is where she was last seen, walking toward the dirt stretch of Eastern Ridge Road. Then he circled an area less than 2 miles away, where the truck was found the next morning. This is not the direction Ayanna was heading home. This is not a route she ever took. This is the complete opposite direction. Whispers rippled through the room. People had heard this in reports, but seeing it on a real map made the anomaly unmistakable. The truck did not drive itself there, the prosecutor said slowly. The truck was placed. Tire track photos were enlarged. The tread pattern matched a 1980 Ford, the truck Raymond owned and lied about selling. Next to the sedan were tracks from a 1980 Ford, and Raymond Hollow Bird was the only person in the community who owned that exact model at that time. The cassette tape, 3.6 seconds, that turned everything. The prosecutor stepped to the screen. The cassette clip played, loud enough for everyone to hear. She refused again. Absolute silence in the courtroom. The prosecutor let the sentence play a second time, slower. People shuddered. Then he explained. The recording was made on the original cassette deck inside Ayanna's truck. Magnetic signature perfectly matched. No signs of editing. The speaker was inches from the microphone. The sound occurred while the vehicle was stopped. Forensic voice biometrics showed a 61% match with Raymond's voice. "No one here can say it's 100%, the prosecutor said, but forensics points to one man as the speaker, Raymond Hollow Bird. Defense counsel rose to object, but the judge simply nodded, proceed. The person who recorded had to be someone else, inside her truck. Ray's DNA, the strongest piece that convicted. The prosecutor placed Ayanna's scrunchie on the evidence table. This was the moment many had been waiting for. This was the evidence that could not be dodged. The scrunchie was in the original sealed evidence from 1995. The DNA recovered from it was embedded deep inside the fabric. It could only get there from direct handling. DNA charts appeared. 2 graphs, one from the scrunchie, one from the water bottle Ray had discarded, overlapped perfectly. 100% match. No one in the room spoke. Not drifted DNA, not secondary transfer. This is direct, forceful contact near the time Ayanna vanished. Then he moved to the bracelet carrying Elias Hollow Bird's DNA. We see Raymond's DNA. We see Elias's DNA. 2 brothers, 2 traces, 1 scene. Defense counsel whispered below, completely unfavorable. The lying timeline, and the lies laid bare. The prosecutor displayed the master timeline, 8:52 p.m. Ayanna leaves the meeting. Witness sees a figure walking toward the dirt road. 9:41 p.m. Gas station transaction rules out Michael Little Elk. 10:15 p.m. Unidentified engine noise heard near Ayanna's house. 11 p.m. 12:30 a.m. No one sees Ayanna return. No one sees her truck moving. No one hears clear arguing. The truck is found the next morning in a completely wrong location. The prosecutor pointed to the block from 9 to 11 p.m. This 2-hour window is the unexplainable gap, but forensics fills it. Then he listed Raw's DNA in the scrunchie, Ray's voice on the cassette, 1980 Ford tire tracks, Elias's bracelet, signs of staging at the scene, Ray's 4 contradictory statements. He replayed the 4 versions Ray gave in the interview room, then said, not one of Raymond Hollow Bird's statements matches the forensic timeline. The jacket, a small detail that exposed the staging. Ayanna's jacket was shown. It had been found nearly 20 meters from the truck, folded far too neatly, as if placed, not dropped. This fit perfectly with wings blurred by dragging, scrunchie and denim fragment placed unnaturally, a bracelet that wasn't Ayanna's inside the truck. No No one drops a jacket and folds it that neatly, the prosecutor said. This is a staged scene. At that moment he turned toward Raymond. And who was at the scene? Who left DNA? Who spoke on the tape? Who drove the 1980 Ford? Who lied about the timeline? Only one person. Ray lowered his head, hands clenched. The complete picture, reconstructing the night of June 14. Finally, the prosecutor asked the courtroom lights to be dimmed. On the screen, the full 3D forensic reconstruction began to play. Ayanna walks out of the meeting. Ray waits near the dirt road. The two talk inside the truck. A confrontation occurs. The cassette accidentally records she refused again. The truck is driven to the remote spot. The jacket is placed down. The scrunchie falls, or is tossed. Other items are arranged to mislead. Ray leaves in the 1980 Ford. Ayanna's truck is abandoned. When the reconstruction ended, the room was so quiet, you could hear breathing. The prosecutor looked at the jury and delivered his final words. For 30 years the truth was buried under the dust of that night. Today we brushed the dust away, and the truth stands revealed. Raymond Hollow Bird was there. Raymond Hollow Bird touched Ayanna. Raymond Hollow Bird staged the scene. Raymond Hollow Bird spoke the words on that tape. And Raymond Hollow Bird knows what happened to Ayanna. Ray said nothing, did not cry, did not protest. He only looked down, heavy as guilt, hard as stone, and silent the same way he had been on the night of June 14, 1995. The trial entered its second week, and everyone believed Raymond Hollow Bird had been backed into a corner. 100% DNA match, cassette tape, tire tracks, false timeline, contradictory statements, every arrow pointed straight at him. But just when it seemed the conclusion was inevitable, the defense unleashed their final counterattack, a twist no one in the courtroom thought they would dare use. Raymond was the cover-up. The real perpetrator was Elias, the brother, who was already dead. Gasps and murmurs swept the room. Some people flinched, others fell completely silent, as if they had just heard an accusation against someone who could no longer defend himself. Raymond's attorney rose, voice firm but not loud, aiming to strike the jury's minds with emotional reason rather than evidence. Elias was the one who did it. The defense argument. The attorney said, "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Raymond Hollow Bird did not harm Ayanna Red Cloud. He was only the one who covered it up, out of loyalty, out of family, out of a dying brother's final plea." He stepped forward and held up a faded photo of Elias. Elias Hollow Bird was hot-tempered, had a history of violence, was near Pine Ridge on the night of June 14. His DNA is on the bracelet inside the truck, and most importantly, he displayed the hospital record showing Elias had been in the ER 2 days before the disappearance, but still on the reservation. Elias could move, he could be inside the truck, and his DNA, ladies and gentlemen, is inside Ayanna's vehicle. The attorney continued, "And Raymond, there is no evidence Raymond harmed Ayanna, no blood, no violence, no witness saw him with her, no injuries on his hands when arrested, no threats." He paused half a second, then said, "DNA does not prove action. DNA only proves contact. Raymond may have touched the scrunchie while trying to clean up after Elias panicked and left Ayanna behind." Some in the gallery lowered their heads. The ambiguity in the Pine Ridge community, the generational silence, gave this argument emotional weight. Then the attorney delivered the final blow. Elias was hot-tempered. Elias drank. Elias had assaulted others. Elias died in 2011, taking the secret with him. And Raymond, the surviving younger brother, simply carried the family's burden. "Ladies and gentlemen," the attorney said, "this is not the case of a murderer. This is the tragedy of a man trapped between blood and fear." Their twist was clear. Shift the blame to a dead man. Turn Ray into a victim of circumstance. Prosecution counterstrike. A dead brother does not change forensic facts. When it was his turn, the prosecutor showed no anger. He simply walked to the center of the room, placed a hand on the table, and looked straight at the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "the dead cannot stand trial. But science still stands." He brought up the forensic match chart, the 100% match between Ray and the scrunchie. Elias's DNA appears only on the bracelet, an item that never belonged to Ayanna. Ray's DNA appears on the scrunchie, the item Ayanna wore every day. Ray lied about when he sold the truck. Ray lied about where he was on June 14. Ray lied 4 separate times in the interview room. Ray said Elias doesn't deserve to be dragged into this. He paused on the last line, emphasizing every word. That is not the statement of an innocent man. Voice biometrics, the decisive blow. The prosecutor returned to the cassette sentence. She refused again. The forensic expert answered firmly, "No." Elias had a clearer, less hoarse voice than Ray. Ray's comparison sample matches 61%, high enough to identify him as the probable speaker, not his brother. Defense objected, overruled. The prosecutor continued, if Elias was the only one in the truck whose voice was recorded, a long silence, the entire room knew the answer. Timeline crushed Ray's story. The prosecutor rebuilt the timeline. 9:15 a.m. Ayanna leaves the meeting. 9:15, 10 p.m. Truck moves in the wrong direction. 10:30 p.m. Cassette recording created, confirmed by temperature and magnetic vibration analysis. No evidence Elias was driving. 1980 Ford tire tracks, Ray's truck. Scrunchy carries Ray's DNA, not Elias's. Then, the closing. The timeline does not allow Elias to be the sole actor. Forensics eliminates that possibility. Raymond is the only person present at every critical point. The jury heard the final line and knew the truth was not in emotion. The prosecutor said, family is sacred, but using family to hide a crime is not acceptable. He pointed to the DNA chart. Raymond says he covered for Elias. DNA says Raymond was there. The cassette says Raymond was there. The tire tracks say Raymond was there. The lies say Raymond was there. He looked straight at Ray. Your brother is dead, but the truth never died. Ray stayed silent, but his eyes no longer held the confidence of the early days. Now the forensic truth had surrounded him from every side. End of closing arguments, and the final twist lost its power. The defense's last twist, blaming a dead man, collapsed completely against the forensic timeline. Ray's truck cannot appear by itself. 4 contradictory statements cannot be family business. Elias's death cannot erase every forensic trace. The jurors looked at one another. Some nodded slightly, not out of hatred for Ray, not out of blind faith in the prosecution, but because forensics had created a truth there was no escape from. Ray lowered his head, hands trembling slightly. The first time during the entire trial, he knew the final twist had not saved him, and the truth, at last, had defeated the lies. The federal courtroom in Rapid City had no empty seats. Many stood along the wooden walls. Elders held hands. Young people bowed their heads in tension. This was not just the sentencing of Raymond Hollow Bird. This was the moment the Pine Ridge Reservation reclaimed a 30-year-old memory that had never found an answer. Raymond entered the room, wrists cuffed, face taut but without the defiance of the early days. He had not slept the night before, eyes ringed in shadow, gaze lost in emptiness. No more stubbornness. No more circling stories about a third person. No more final shield named Elias. Marissa Lonehorse sat in the front row, eyes fixed on him. She had followed this case from the first dusty pages when it was nothing but scattered paper. Now every forensic piece had locked into place, cold and unbreakable as metal. The judge entered. Everyone rose. The jury filed in. No one looked at Ray. No one looked at the prosecution. They wore the expression of people who had just made a heavy but certain decision. The judge asked, has the jury reached a verdict? The 4-person stood, holding the paper. The room fell deathly quiet. Yes, Your Honor, we have. Count 1, kidnapping. The 4-person read, on the charge of kidnapping, we find the defendant Raymond Hollow Bird guilty. Not a cheer, not a loud breath, only silence, as if the air had been sucked from the room. Kidnapping, even without a direct eyewitness, was proven by the forensic timeline. Ayanna leaves the meeting. Ray appears at the exact window. Ray's voice inside the truck. Truck moved to a remote location. Scrunchy bearing Ray's DNA. No evidence. Ayanna left willingly. An act of force. A deprivation of liberty. An undeniable crime. Ray lowered his head. No reaction. No anger. No shout of I'm innocent. Only a bowed head, as if accepting a fate that had already locked shut. Count 2. Homicide. Nobody conviction. The judge nodded, motioning to continue. The 4-person took a breath, and read slowly and clearly, on the charge of homicide, we find the defendant Raymond Hollow Bird guilty. Some in the back rows began to cry. A young man, a distant relative of Ayanna, gripped the seat in front of him so hard his knuckles went white. This was a nobody conviction, a murder conviction without a body, extremely rare, especially on native reservations. But the prosecution had built a forensic chain so strong that Ray's DNA in the scrunchie, Elias's DNA on the bracelet, Rose staged scene, cassette tape capturing confrontation, truck moved, jacket placed, evidence manipulated, Ray's constantly lying timeline, Ray's voice as the last sound in the truck. No body needed, no need to prove every second of the act. Forensics spoke for itself, and the jury believed it. Ray closed his eyes for a few seconds, the first time he showed a real reaction, but when he opened them again, they were cold and empty. The judge's final remarks. The judge turned to the jury and thanked them. Then he turned to Raymond. "Mr. Hollow Bird, the jury has determined that you are responsible for the disappearance and death of Ayanna Red Cloud. There is no body, but the forensics, the statements, and your own conduct have painted a picture that cannot be ignored." He paused. The entire room held its breath. "You were the last person to touch her. You were the last voice recorded inside her truck. You were the last human contact she ever had. That places you in ultimate responsibility." Ray stared at the floor. His cheek twitched slightly, as if fighting something back. The judge raised the gavel, voice steady, neither angry nor trembling, only the weight of justice. On the charges of kidnapping and homicide, the court sentences the defendant Raymond Hollow Bird to a combined term of 50 to 70 years in federal prison. No applause, no cheers. Real justice never comes with joy, only a relief mixed with regret. An officer behind him placed a hand on Ray's shoulder, ready to lead him away. Ray turned his head once toward the door, where light from the hallway spilled in. One brief hazy look, like a man who still thought he might grasp one last piece of a lie. But there were no pieces left. Marissa watched Ray being led out, the chains catching the light. She felt no triumph, only the heavy truth. Justice had arrived, but far too late for Ayanna, who vanished into the windy night of 1995. And as the courtroom doors closed behind Raymond, the Pine Ridge community knew that a long, dark chapter had ended, but the wound would remain for a very long time. The Ayanna Red Cloud case closed in federal court, but for tribal police, the FBI, and the entire Pine Ridge Reservation, it was not a period, it was a comma. One old door had shut, and 3 new ones swung open at once, revealing a darkness far greater than anyone had imagined over the past 3 decades. Raymond Hollow Bird was convicted. Elias Hollow Bird had been dead since 2011, but the forensic timeline, when read carefully, pointed to something no one had yet dared admit. The 2 brothers could not have staged the scene alone. There were other DNA traces. There was denim that didn't match the Hollow Birds. There were other silent voices across 30 years in Pine Ridge. Right after the trial, Marissa Lonehorse received a call from the FBI office in Denver. The lead agent's voice was curt. "Ruined Detective Lonehorse, the Hollow Bird case doesn't end here. We want to expand the investigation." The Hollow Bird pattern, a new term emerges. 1 week after the trial, Tribal PD and the FBI held an 8-hour joint meeting. No prepared slides, no press conference, no big announcements. It took place in the small conference room behind Tribal PD headquarters, walls still covered with the Pine Ridge map, and the half-erased chalk timeline from the Ayanna case. On the table lay a nearly 10-inch thick file stamped, "Hollow Bird Pattern, Initial Forensic Review." Marissa opened the first page, and her heart raced. There were 7 unsolved disappearances of women between 1987 and 2004 on the reservation and surrounding areas. 3 of them were strikingly similar to Ayanna's. Rumen, vanished near remote dirt roads, vehicle never found, or found in an odd location. Scattered evidence, as if planted, mismatched timelines, no body. They called it the Hollow Bird Pattern, a behavioral pattern linked to the Hollow Bird family, or the circle around them. No one dared draw a final conclusion. But faint forensics always speak louder than intuition. The FBI agent said bluntly, 2 brothers couldn't pull off this many cases unless there was support or a repeating pattern. Marissa stared at each woman's name in the file. One was 17, one was 22, one was a mother of 2, one had been written off as a runaway because there were no obvious signs of violence. All vanished like Ayanna, all remained missing, unresolved. Othram takes on 3 more cases, and DNA opens the way. Immediately after the trial, the prosecutor contacted Othram directly and asked them to review 3 disappearance cases from 1989, 1998. These 3 shared one startling common thread. Victims all vanished near areas where the Hollow Bird family lived. Original investigations noted scattered evidence, 1 or 2 personal items found far from the disappearance site. Those items had once been deemed insufficient when DNA technology was primitive, but now, in Othram's hands, every thread, every cigarette butt, every button, every hair tie could hold a forgotten trace. Othram agreed. They opened the 3 new files and moved them into forensic genome sequencing. The lab director told Marissa over video call, "We promise nothing, but today's technology is far stronger than even 2025. If any DNA is there, we will find it." That was not a promise, that was a warning that science was about to dig deep into a past many had hoped would stay asleep. 2 other family names surface, and the darkness grows larger than Hollow Bird. During genealogical comparison, forensics uncovered 2 other lineages with weak but notable genetic overlap. Black Eagle branch. Runs above branch. These families had no direct tie to Ray or Elias, but they connected to the denim DNA fragment from the Ayanna case. Or there was coordination among multiple individuals, or older scenes had been staged by multiple hands. The FBI agent said the sentence that silenced the room, the Hollowbird brothers may only be the tip of the iceberg. The Pine Ridge community, the silence finally breaks. After the trial, something strange began to happen. Elders on the reservation started sharing stories they had never dared tell before. A woman said that in 1994, she saw Raymond and Elias arguing fiercely near the road where Ayanna disappeared. A middle-aged man said Elias's truck was seen on Wounded Knee Road the night another woman vanished. A young man said his father once heard about something no one was ever supposed to mention from 1992. Marissa wrote every story down. None were proof on their own, but they formed a pattern. The 30-year silence was cracking. The forensic report's conclusion, opening the next chapter. 3 months after Ray's conviction, Othram sent a preliminary report. On 1989 evidence, unidentified male DNA detected. On 1992 evidence, very faint touch DNA, enough for reanalysis. On 1998 evidence, mixed DNA, 2 males, 1 female. One line in the report made Marissa jump from her chair. The 1992 sample shows distant genealogical relation to the Hollowbird lineage. Not a perfect match, not the same person, but a distant genetic connection. That means, not just Ray, not just Elias, not just one person in the family, but possibly a wider network, stretching across years, multiple families, multiple disappearances. Conclusion: time cannot hide science. In the final report sent to Tribal PD and the FBI, Othram's chief forensic scientist wrote one line: "Time cannot hide biology." That sentence became the opening motto for the Cold Case Initiative, Pine Ridge Extension, the program to investigate the remaining 7 disappearances. Marissa read it over and over, dozens of times. She understood that the Ayanna case was not just the end of one tragedy, it was the beginning of a painful but necessary excavation. Standing in front of the big wall map, pinning 3 new red markers for the 3 women whose files had just been reopened, she realized, forensics didn't just find the person who harmed Ayanna. Forensics is dragging an entire dark past into the light, and the Pine Ridge Reservation will never be the same again. The Ayanna Red Cloud case is closed, but the truth, the larger, deeper truth, has only just begun. When you look back at Ayanna Red Cloud's story in Pine Ridge, it's impossible not to think about America today, where far too many Native women, young women, poor women, rural women still vanish in silence. Ayanna had no body, no security footage, just a scrunchie carrying Ray's DNA, a 3.6-second cassette with the words "she refused again," a jacket folded too neatly, a truck driven the wrong way, and a community that stayed quiet out of fear or the belief that she probably just left on her own. The first lesson for American society: never dismiss any missing person case, especially those involving groups that have already been forgotten. If in 1995 tribal police had treated the oddly parked truck and scattered evidence as signs of crime, if the community had spoken up sooner about everything that felt off with the Hollowbird brothers, the case might not have dragged on for 30 years. The second lesson: science only reaches its full power when it is prioritized and funded fairly. Othram, forensic genealogy, touch DNA, voice biometrics, these are not random miracles, they are the result of an America willing to invest money and effort into cold cases, and that investment must be extended to every community, not just big cities. The third lesson touches culture. The sentence "she refused again" reminds us that no always means no, whether on a reservation, in an old truck, or in a college dorm. The fact that Ayanna had to pay with her life for refusing is a warning that America must teach its sons about consent, about respecting other people's boundaries, instead of protecting silence. Finally, when forensics concludes time cannot hide biology, it is also a reminder to all of us: the truth about violence, about discrimination, about the abandonment of Native communities, will always surface. It is far better to face it early than to let another generation live in the darkness. Ayanna did. If you're interested in more stories brought to light by science and justice like Ayanna's, please hit subscribe so you don't miss the next investigative journey. Thank you for coming along, and see you in the next video, where we keep pulling the truth out of the dark.